Now, we are now joined by the CEO of the South African Social Security Agency, SASSA, Busisiwe Memela Khambula, to give us their side of this. Ms. Memela Khambula, thanks so much for your time this morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting us to give our perspective. Thanks, ma'am.
So this issue we have been speaking about, we spoke about the SRD grants and some of the fraudulent activity that takes place there. But let me perhaps start with something that has been raised by one of our viewers. And it was a question that I also had. If you think of how cumbersome at times it is for ordinary South Africans to actually access some of the grants. Someone was saying, if you look at how we need to go and make sure we are cleared from this database, that database for the SRD grants, for example, or in receiving any other grants, all of the paperwork and things that we have to go through, why is it then that the process is not more stringent to detect the sort of fraudulent activity by employees of the state?
Let me just make a position clear first, ma'am, in terms of what the process is for everybody. We don't have one process for employees of the state and a different process for other people in our communities. Everybody goes through the same process. The process we use for the 350, which of course was a COVID grant, is a digital process, which of course we have databases that we check against as to whether people should or should not qualify. On our normal grants, which is our traditional grants, your child support grant, and your elderly persons grants, those grants are done manually, and the person has to come to the SASSA office, whether you are a government employee or you're not a government employee. The rules and regulations that drive what we can or cannot do as an institution on the SRD grant, we can take people for legal action. On our normal grant, our response in terms of what the Social Security Act defines is that we need to collect back the money from the individual that may have gotten the money from the state wrongly. So those are two processes, and we're hoping that over time, it doesn't matter who it is that defrauds the state, that will be able to take those people through a criminal process.
So speaking to the DA earlier with regard to that process, so where do these 3,268 people who've been flagged, who have fraudulently received these grants, which departments do they emanate from in the main?
They emanate from all the departments that we have generally in the state. And interestingly, most of these people are not people that are your normal public servants, in a sense that it's their traditional public servants. They are people that are doing either learnerships or people that are doing public works programs. We actually identified them ourselves because what we did, now that we have government databases and we're able to validate people on the basis of the information that we have from 350, we then took the databases that we have in terms of government employees. We then it ran through our SOCPAN program, which is our normal program for our normal grants. And that's where we picked up that there were a number of people that had not come back to us to indicate to us as an institution that they were employed. Because when you apply for a grant, it doesn't mean that everybody should not be unemployed, because we actually look at the threshold, unlike the 350 grant. We then found them, and then we actually closed all those accounts and demanded that all those people should come and actually give us a proof of where it is that they are employed and what it is that they are doing, so that we can assess their income. And what we found is some of them have a right to the grant because of their income threshold. Those that don't have a right to the grant are the ones that, one, we've reported them to their departments so that they can take disciplinary action on them. And the second part is we've collected the money through the departments, actually putting a garnishee order on them for us to be able to get that money. And the process has not been completed because we have to run through all of them to make sure that we've processed all those government employees.
Ms. Memela Khambula, shouldn't that have been thought through in the first instance? Because if you think about, for example, the SRD grants and linking of the various government databases so that you are able to pick up whether someone is receiving another payment elsewhere in the system, why wasn't that done from the onset, one? And two, how long did this go on for before you actually detected what was happening?
In terms of why it was not done before, is that in terms of the processes that we had prior to the COVID grant, is that we didn't validate against databases of government other than Home Affairs. Now we have that ability, having put that in place and having learned from the SRD grant. So this is a discipline that we're putting in place and a process that we're putting in place which didn't exist before. So we've been utilizing it for the past 2 years. Not only are we linking to just those people that are working for national government, we're also linking to people that are working with municipalities, and we currently do it through MOAs with different departments, and we're hoping that in future we'll do it electronically so that we can make sure that the process is much easier. But it's an area that we continue to improve in terms of making sure that we can be able to detect fraudulent beneficiaries upfront in terms of the entry strategy that we're putting in place, so that we don't end up having to collect funds at the back after people have come into the system, that we actually validate people upfront, which is what we continue to improve on.
So in terms of how long this had been going on for, because in that parliamentary response that the minister gave, she had given an example of 1 month. I think it was the month of July that she referred to, that this had cost around 200 million rand. So if you will, if there's clarification to be had there, please go ahead and do that. But if that was if that was for just that month, the 7th month of the year, how much had been paid out to people who were not deserving, and how long had this been going on for? Even if it's just a ballpark figure that you can give us.
I would be incorrect to give a ballpark figure, because what we are doing is we're validating all 300 of them. And this is not going to be the end. We're going to validate all the other people that are also in other departments. For example, we've looked at the people that are working for the post office that have been also receiving grants. It's a process we're doing across government as a whole, because that's an easier place for us to start before we can link up with the private sector companies, for us to also assess as to whether this is taking place with people that are also working with the private sector.
Let me ask it differently, Ms. Memela Khambula, with regard to the 3,268 people who've now been identified as having received these grants fraudulently. Of those, for those 3,268, how long had they been receiving these grants for on average?
At the time that we made the assessment, most of them had been doing the grant, have been receiving the grant for more than a year.
More than a year. So what would that amount to on average?
On average, well, an individual, if it's a child support grant, would be receiving 440 rands, and the amount that the minister indicated was for 1 month. So you could indicate what that amount would have been over 12 months.
I'm just quickly grabbing a calculator, and just to see, we're talking about there, if we look at the lowest with regard to the grant that you just mentioned at 450 for the child support grant, over 17 million rand. And of course, we are just estimating now. But with regard to those people, in terms of consequence management, which is a term that is bandied about so liberally, what consequences have they suffered?
Those that we've reported to their departments would then take disciplinary processes on them, because we can't discipline them since they don't work for us. And on our side, the only thing that we can do is to collect back the money that they actually received without what that they were not due to receive. So the one part is what we can do, the other part is what is done by individual departments through the public service.
Okay, let me understand this. So if a member of the public, an ordinary member of the public, Sakina Kamwendo, engages in fraudulent activity with regard to SASSA grants, what are the consequences then for me as an ordinary member of the public?
For a person who has received a 350, because of the new regulations that were put in place with regards to COVID, you would then, we would lay a criminal charge on you. If you are an ordinary client, on the other side, what we put in place is we have to actually come back and collect the money back from you, which is why I said earlier, ma'am, that what we need to do in terms of a policy framework is anybody that defrauds a grant process we need to be able to lay criminal charges on them. But that's a process that becomes a parliamentary process.
So, but why is what I'm trying to understand? Because if SASSA then is able to lay a criminal charge against me as a member of the public, why are you not able to? So you say you can't lay criminal charges against members of the public?
On an ordinary grant, the only thing that we can do is to come and demand that you pay back the money. We can't lay criminal charges on you. On an SRD 350, because the framework that was used for it and the processes that were put in place, that if you defraud the state during COVID, we will lay criminal charges. That we can do with 350, but not necessarily with our ordinary grant. We have to collect the money back. Hence, we have the debt book that we have to collect the money from. It's because of those ordinary people that actually have also defrauded the state that we need to collect from. Hence, I'm saying, ma'am, what we are motivating with our department is that we request Parliament to put in place a policy that says if you defraud the state through the social grant process, we should lay criminal charges on you.
Wow. The fact that that is not in place almost explains why people are taking their chances, and successfully so in many cases, in defrauding the Social Security Agency. But with regard to the 3,268 public servants who receive these grants, you said that the various departments will be dealing with that. But just in terms of their names, because that's what the DA Shadow Deputy Minister had also said, they had asked for those names. Will you be furnishing those names to them or not?
What we would have to establish is which department they are on, they are in, and what their names are. The names, of course, we've got because we've got them in the database, and we will be able to provide those names.
Well, and
we'll just have to check as to what the legal implications are, but we have the names of the people and which departments they are in, and we can provide that.
Well, so the DA saying they can lay criminal charges, or they intend to lay criminal charges. So SASSA can't lay criminal charges, but members of the public or political parties can.
I don't know in terms of what the legal framework they will use, because in terms of the SASSA Act, which is what we utilize, we currently, in terms of our framework, cannot do that. We can only collect the money back, but we can't lay criminal charges on them except on the SRD because of the framework that was used in relation to that.
And in terms of collecting those monies, you don't seem to be faring very well on that score either. Only 12.6 million rand so far?
Because it's a process, ma'am, it therefore means that we need to request their departments just on those that are public servants, for them to then put a garnishing order on those public servants, for those that are no longer working for government, because some of them aren't anymore. It therefore means that we need to go through a collection process for us to collect that money.
Ms. Memela Khambula, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks so much for your time this morning. That's the CEO of the South African grant agency, SASSA, and saying there that basically those government employees, 3,268 of them who received grants they were not entitled to, they cannot lay criminal charges against them as SASSA because of the framework under which they operate. So basically they're asking the various departments to garnish their salaries, as it were.